Imagine for a moment a river that has flowed freely for 60 years or more. Clear, cold water tumbling over stones, nourishing everything along its banks. Now picture that same river after decades of silt, mud, and debris slowly building up on its floor. The current weakens. The water turns sluggish. And one day, a single clump of sediment breaks loose, jams against a narrow bend, and the river simply stops. That is what happens inside your arteries when plaque hardens and narrows the pathways that carry life to your heart and brain. And here is the truth that most people learn too late: this process does not announce itself with trumpets. It whispers. A little shortness of breath climbing stairs. A twinge in the chest after a heavy meal. Cold feet even in summer. By the time the alarm bells ring, the river is already dangerously clogged. But what if I told you that your body was designed to clean its own rivers? What if the same foods that have sat on your kitchen counter for decades, the ones your grandmother called good for what ails you, actually hold the power to scrape away that sludge, inch by inch, and restore the flow? This is not wishful thinking. This is peer-reviewed science, confirmed by major studies from institutions like the Cleveland Clinic and Harvard Medical School. And for the next half hour, I want to walk with you through exactly how your arteries become blocked, why the medical establishment often reaches for the scalpel before the salad bowl, and most importantly, which everyday foods can turn back the clock on your vascular age. Let us start with fear, because fear, when it is honest, is a gift. Every 7 minutes in this country, someone dies from a heart attack caused by a blocked artery. But here is the detail that haunts me: more than half of those deaths happen in people who had no prior symptoms. No chest pain flagged by their doctor. No abnormal stress test. Just a quiet, ticking time bomb inside their coronary arteries. A study published in the journal Circulation followed nearly 3,000 older adults for 12 years and found that those with the highest levels of arterial plaque had a 400% higher risk of sudden cardiac death. 400%. That is not a statistic. That is your neighbor, your bridge partner, your childhood friend who seemed perfectly fine last Tuesday. And yet, the vast majority of us have been taught that clogged arteries are an inevitable part of aging. That once plaque builds up, your only options are statins, stents, or bypass surgery. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, one of the most important medical books of the last 20 years, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, documented that severely blocked arteries can actually open back up without drugs or procedures, using nothing more than a carefully chosen diet. Dr. Esselstyn was a surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic, one of the top heart hospitals in the world. He got tired of watching patients return for second and third bypass surgeries because nobody had addressed the underlying cause. So he put his patients on a plant-based, low-fat eating plan. The results were so dramatic that his colleagues refused to believe them at first. But the angiograms, the actual X-ray pictures of the arteries, showed it clearly: the rivers were flowing again. So what exactly clogs your arteries, and why does food have the power to unclog them? Think of arterial plaque as a kind of biological cement. It starts with tiny particles of LDL cholesterol, the so-called bad cholesterol, penetrating the delicate inner lining of your blood vessels. Your immune system, which is always on alert, sees these particles as intruders. It sends in white blood cells called macrophages to gobble them up. But when those macrophages become engorged with cholesterol, they turn into foam cells, and those foam cells accumulate into fatty streaks. Over time, calcium and fibrous tissue cover the fatty streaks like a scab, creating a hard, calcified plaque. That is the stage where doctors start talking about blockages of 50, 60, or 70%. But here is the hope: and it is a very real hope. Your arteries are not passive pipes. They are living, breathing organs. The inner layer, called the endothelium, is constantly producing nitric oxide, a molecule that relaxes and widens your blood vessels, keeping them flexible and smooth. When the endothelium is healthy, it actively resists plaque formation. It repels sticky cells. It encourages blood to flow without friction. The problem is that a diet high in processed foods, refined sugars, and certain types of fats damages the endothelium. It becomes inflamed. It stops producing nitric oxide. And that is when the cement starts to set. Now, the foods that clean your arteries naturally do three things. First, they reduce the inflammation that triggers the initial damage. Second, they provide the raw materials your endothelium needs to repair itself and produce nitric oxide. And third, they help your body remove existing cholesterol deposits by increasing something called reverse cholesterol transport, a fancy term for your liver vacuuming up excess cholesterol from the artery walls and excreting it into your intestines. You do not need to remember that term. You just need to remember that every time you eat one of these foods, you are sending a cleanup crew into your blood vessels. Let me start with the most powerful of them all. A humble, deep red fruit that grows on almost every continent. The pomegranate. In a 2004 study published in the journal Clinical Nutrition, researchers gave patients with severe carotid artery blockages, the arteries in the neck that feed the brain, a single ounce of pomegranate juice every day for 1 year. At the end of the year, the patients who drank the juice had seen their arterial plaque thickness decrease by up to 30%. Meanwhile, the control group, who did not drink the juice, saw their plaque increase by 9%. 30% reduction versus 9% increase. That is not a small difference. That is the difference between needing a stent and never needing one. Pomegranates work because they are loaded with polyphenols, especially punicalagins, which increase your body's production of nitric oxide and also protect your LDL cholesterol from becoming oxidized. Oxidized LDL is the really dangerous form, the form that easily penetrates your artery walls. Pomegranates turn that process off like a switch. Next, consider the common beet. Yes, the same beetroot that your parents likely pickled in jars on the pantry shelf. Beets are one of the richest dietary sources of inorganic nitrate, which your body converts directly into nitric oxide. Within 2 hours of drinking a glass of beet juice, your arteries become more flexible and your blood pressure drops measurably. A meta-analysis of 22 clinical trials found that beetroot supplementation reduced systolic blood pressure by an average of 4 to 10 points. That might not sound dramatic, but for an older adult, every point of blood pressure reduction lowers your risk of stroke by about 5%. And unlike blood pressure medications, which can cause dizziness, electrolyte imbalances, and fatigue, beets have no side effects except one: they turn your urine and stool a harmless shade of pink. That is a small price to pay for cleaner arteries. Then there is the leafy green that Popeye made famous, but the real story goes far beyond iron. Spinach, along with kale, Swiss chard, and arugula, is packed with dietary nitrates just like beets. But spinach also contains high levels of vitamin K, which directs calcium away from your artery walls and into your bones. This is critical because one of the biggest misconceptions about arterial plaque is that calcium is always the enemy. Calcium is essential for your heart to beat, your nerves to fire, your muscles to move. The problem is when calcium ends up in the wrong place. Vitamin K activates a protein called matrix GLA protein, whose sole job is to prevent calcium from depositing in your blood vessels. Without enough vitamin K, that calcium drifts into your arteries and hardens the plaque, making it brittle and more likely to rupture. A ruptured plaque is what causes most heart attacks. So eating spinach every day is not just about lowering cholesterol. It is about keeping your plaque soft and stable instead of hard and dangerous. Now I want to talk about a food that has been controversial for decades. The egg. Specifically, the egg yolk. For years, doctors warned older patients to avoid egg yolks because of their high cholesterol content. But that advice came from a misunderstanding of how dietary cholesterol actually affects your blood cholesterol. The landmark study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition followed nearly 500,000 Chinese adults for 9 years and found no association between egg consumption and heart disease. In fact, those who ate 1 egg per day had a lower risk of hemorrhagic stroke. Why? Because egg yolks are one of the best sources of phospholipids, particularly phosphatidylcholine. These phospholipids help your body transport cholesterol out of your arteries and into your liver for disposal. They also improve the function of HDL, your good cholesterol, making it more efficient at its cleanup job. So unless you have a specific genetic condition called familial hypercholesterolemia, eating whole eggs in moderation 3 to 4 per week is not only safe but beneficial for your arteries. Just do not fry them in butter.